This was a really interesting press conference because of just like the level of the emotions, I guess, to not get too specific, the emotions generally that were around Cowboys Nation. What kind of emotions did you feel like Mike McCarthy brought to the podium?
Yeah, I think it was real. That was the best way to describe it. And there are a lot of times, I mean, Mike McCarthy, he's a professional coach in the sense of he knows how to handle press conferences. Since he really arrived on the scene in Dallas in 2020, he buttons things up at the podium, and he's done a really good job of that against the media multiple times through the ups and the downs. And he really kind of remains steady all the way through. But today was a little bit different. It felt like the emotions were high. I think the frustrations were high at the same time, and he really addressed both of those things. He talked about the heightened emotion of having the lead up that Dallas did, and then really the crash that ensued. And he took responsibility and accountability for it. He said we just weren't good enough, and that's got to be the goal. I mean, he was brought in to win, and he's done it in the regular season. He just hasn't done it in the playoffs, and that's been the number one thing I think that Cowboys fans have really honed in on when asking about job security and clamoring for job security is the fact that he's 1-3 in the postseason. And coaches, he's smart in the fact that, I mean, you're not gonna sneak that record by him. He understands just as much as anybody that one win in 4 seasons in the playoffs is not going to be enough. And I think you could kind of feel that edge to him in the press conference today, and it outlined in really what I thought was as real as he's been up at the podium and as transparent as he's been at the podium throughout his Dallas tenure.
You know, I enjoyed listening to his press conference because, like you said, he kept it real as he could. There was something he said, and I want to get your thoughts on it, where he said, with all due respect to the fans, he said, what has happened to the Cowboys over the last 20 years is, I'm paraphrasing, is not the responsibility of the team that year. It's like they have to take care of themselves. They weren't responsible for the lack of a Super Bowl over those other years. And I want to know what you thought about that, because I actually thought that was very truthful. Yeah. And he has to say that to his team because they don't need any more pressure that's already put on them.
No, I think you're spot on. I said that. I think I said it with KNC at Buffalo Wild Wings on the Friday leading in. This is a team that has carried the weight of the 27, now 28 years prior to really the lack of success that has happened since the mid-1990s. And every year that they don't get the job done, that weight just adds on a little bit more. So, no, it's not their fault. No, it's not the responsibility of the current team to carry that weight as a whole. But the truth of the matter is, when you wear the star on the side of your helmet and you take the field at AT&T Stadium, the standard of being a champion is what you are trying to achieve. Whether or not they've achieved that since the mid-90s or not, that's what you're trying to achieve, and that's what the Cowboys fandom and Cowboys faithful suggests. I mean, that's what they expect out of guys like that. So while no, they don't have the responsibility individually for it, and really the past years, I mean, outside of what they've had their hands tangible on. But in the end, I mean, at the same time, the expectation is championships. So when you don't reach that, the pressure starts to build more and more and more. And I think you're starting to see that with this team, and you're starting to see it with fans at the same time too. I think there's always been a frustration whenever you don't win championships or you're not even competing really for championships without a conference title berth in 27 years either. I think that frustration builds every time they don't get there. So in a roundabout way, I do agree with Mike McCarthy, but at the same time, perception is reality. And a lot of times the perception of the Cowboys is that you're expected to win championships, and when you don't, it's a disappointment.
Well, I mean, they talk about, I mean, in all these press conferences, they talk about understanding that. I found it to be a little odd that he said that in that press conference, because that felt like something you absolutely say to your players, but maybe not to the general public, especially as they're seething in this moment.
Well, they may be seething and they may be emotional, but I'm serious as a heart attack when I say this. I think it's a ridiculous psychological burden that the organization and the fans put on each team that plays for the Dallas Cowboys, because you're expected to win a Super Bowl. And I counter that with the Texas Rangers. And let me explain why, because they're fresh new champions of the world. This is why I counter that, because the players to a person this past season kept saying, we know the Rangers had never won a championship, but that wasn't us. And let me tell you why they didn't have that burden. Because nobody expected them to win a World Series. They wanted them to, but they that's why the victory was so sweet for the Ranger fans. It was like, yes, I never thought it would ever happen. But for the Cowboys and their fans, it's absolutely insane that an expectation is you have to win a Super Bowl when that's not the bar for any team in any other sport. Any other sport, I dare me to find a team that has that same bar and the drought that exists.
I hear you, CA, but I also exist in a place where, a lot of folks, ain't nobody trying to hear that.
I'm just trying to say what's the fact is, I'm not saying it's right.
Kyle?
Yeah, and I think there are other teams that are up to that expectation. Think about the New York Yankees and the Los Angeles Lakers, the Boston Celtics. I mean,
but the Lakers won one 2 years ago.
They
and
did.
the Celtics won one a few more
years.
A couple of years before that.
The Yankees haven't won one since 2009. It's their longest streak as an organization without a championship, too. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Cowboys are one of the winningest organizations in football for a reason, because they're always relevant. They always have a team that they feel like can contend. And, I mean, the fact of the matter is the memes are out there, the internet speaks, and you hear it all the time of Cowboys fans always say it's their year. Well, there's a reason for that, because they're competitive every year. You've won NFC East titles. You've been in divisional games. You haven't been set up as well as you were this year at any other point since the mid-1990s, and I think that's part of the frustration of how this all went down. You were the 2 seed. You had 2 home games ready for you to play as long as you took care of business in the first one against the Green Bay team that, while they were one of the hotter teams in the NFL, you still felt like you were the better roster up top to bottom. You had an MVP candidate at quarterback. You had one of the best receivers in football. You have one of the best edge rushers in football. You have the NFL's interception leader. There was really no excuse to even lose that game, nonetheless be down 27-0 in the middle of the second quarter. And I think that's where Mike was real. Reg, you talked about it a moment ago, saying that you were surprised he said something like that. And I think that's because there is that facade. There's that wall that's put up in between the Cowboys and the fans to try and negate some of that pressure. Well, now the pressure's fully on Mike McCarthy. He's going into the final year of his deal. He's going into a prove-it one-year deal where if there's no playoff success, then he's there it is. His 5-year tenure is up. His contract is up, and he will no longer be the coach of the Cowboys, but he has a year to fix it now. And so I think that facade is starting to be broken down, and instead you're breaking that fourth wall. You're breaking that invisible barrier trying to protect you from the pressure, and instead you're embracing it. And I think that's part of why that mindset kind of resonated with me in the way that he attacked that press conference today, because it was different. It wasn't something that we had seen, or it wasn't even really something that we expected.
We're talking to Kyle Youmans, DallasCowboys.com, right here on The Fan. And Kyle, in order to fix it, you have to know what the issue is. And I know that he was asked a few times, Mike McCarthy was, on if there was a through line, if there was a commonality between the 3 losses that you've seen in the past 3 seasons. Were you at all disappointed that he didn't give us more than they didn't play hard enough?
Yeah, I mean, it's also one of those things where you don't. Maybe he doesn't really know what the exact problem was. He's still evaluating tape. He did say today that he was going to finish up with his assistant coaches and their evaluation of what went down on Sunday and kind of react from there. So I think there's further evaluation that needs to be had. And, I mean, the fact of the matter is McCarthy can deflect that question now, and he doesn't have to really answer to it outside of a couple one-off interviews between now and training camp. So there's a little bit here and there that I think he would look at. But whenever you lose a game like that, there's really no one spot you can throw a finger to. I mean, really everybody deserved a piece of that one just because it wasn't the same team that you saw win 12 games. It wasn't a team that you that you expected to lose to a 7 seed. So, yeah, everybody deserves a little bit of the blame. And so whenever I think he gave kind of a roundabout, maybe an umbrella question, a broad answered question, I wasn't necessarily surprised. I think that's something that he's still trying to evaluate himself. And then, of course, they're going to have to try and attack that in the offseason and try and fix that through roster building or coaching staff changes. So I still think there's a lot of changes that need to come with this team because you can't necessarily run it back. And in order to make those changes, you have to address and have to diagnose what the problem really was in the first place.
Well, with that being the case and, things being as they are, him kind of giving us a general answer, as you mentioned, and it looks like we have reporting that should Dan Quinn not get a head coaching job, you'd expect him to be back. What is the opportunity for something to change for this team in this next season from your perspective?
Well, I think there maybe is maybe an aggressive nature from a free agency standpoint. I mean, cap-wise, you have to make some moves, and you got to find a way to still sign some of your better players. I mean, C.D. Lamb's going into his option year. You've got Micah Parsons on the books coming up here in the next few seasons. Maybe you try and get ahead in those regards and then free up cap space to make some moves. But this is a team that's been very conservative in using that cap recently. Why not go for it? Why not try and address the issues and then rectify those issues as quickly as possible? So there's ways I think you can do it. Maybe instead of drafting at 24 overall, maybe if there's a pocket of players that you like in the second round and the third round, you drop back and you accumulate more draft picks and you try and fill holes that direction. I mean, this is a good class for linebackers, and you need a middle linebacker. You need somebody if Leighton Vander Esch isn't going to play another down of football, you need somebody to be in the middle of your defense. And it helps free up guys like Damone Clark. You get DeMarvion Overshown back. At the cornerback spot, you're naturally going to get better because you get Trayvon Diggs back in the fold. But what do you do with Stephon Gilmore? How do you address the boundary? How do you address the nickel position with Jordan Lewis being a free agent? So it starts with roster acquisition. If it's Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn, though, that are your two guys, one thing that you can count on also is continuity. I mean, you saw how this offense got better as the year went on. From the beginning to the end, you saw the Mike McCarthy system begin to really work. You saw Dak Prescott buy into that system. Year number 2 should be better in that regard, or at least on paper it should be. So maybe there's one way that you can get better, because that is a pro of keeping those two guys around, as you have that responsibility and you have that continuity with the pressure at a little bit of a heightened stance.
But you can understand why the fans will not trust it come playoff time, because this particular case, you had it laid out the way you wanted. You had home field all the way up until you played for the NFC Championship game. You had most of the players injured free. They were like healthy. It was like you dominated at home, hadn't lost in 16 straight games. It was like you had it was like the best opportunity they've had in years. And it was a complete meltdown on every phase, not just coaches, not just players, not just defense, not just offense, special teams. Everybody had fingerprints all over it. And that's why is they could go undefeated in the regular season and nobody will believe it until they win the whole damn thing.
And maybe this is the breaking point that you needed. And I'm not trying to sell hope to anybody 5 days after they lost in the wild card round in a bad way. I get it. I'm not trying to sell hope. But this year, I came on The Fan last week and talked about it and said it would be surprising to me to see Dallas surprised in that fact, because they got beat by San Francisco in the wild card round 2 years ago at home. You got to show up at home. Then last year, you beat Tom Brady. You finally figure something out on the road. Then you go on the road to San Francisco and you get beat by the 49ers again. This time it felt like the experience was on their side. You're going up against a young team in Green Bay. You felt like you can kind of take advantage of those experiences in the playoffs and it would work in your favor. Instead, it went the complete opposite direction. So I don't think from a Cowboys standpoint, even if you win the division next year and you become the first team since 2004 to win the division back-to-back, which, of course, that just shows how hard it is to have continued success in this league anyways. But if you let's say you do and you have home field advantage again, I can guarantee you this team's not sleepwalking into that first playoff game and saying, hey, like, let's just go in and get it done, and then we'll be on to the divisional round or on to the NFC Championship game. You can't do that anymore, period. If anybody experienced what they experienced on Sunday, it should hurt. It should be disappointing. It should be frustrating. And I think that's going to last until you make a run. So maybe it was a breaking point that needed to be reached for this team to try and break through that mold and that pressure that we talked about a little bit earlier.
Kyle, I appreciate you and I hear you, but you can't blame anybody listening to that feeling that they've heard having a deja vu, seeing as it's felt like the Cowboys have been there before. But you know what? We appreciate you always giving us your time, always giving us your insight. And, we hope to talk to you again here soon, Kyle.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys as always. Y'all have fun.